Romans chapter 9, verse 28. For he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because a short work will the Lord make upon the earth. It was his last sermon, in fact, his last public ministration of any kind, when the feebly kindled glow of action left his frame. The chill of death set in, but the hope, the purpose to reach ere death should seal his eyes, the green shores of the Chesapeake still reigned in the soul of the saint and patriot. During the next 5 days, riding in their closed carriage, he and his companion covered 57 additional miles of their way. The final halt was made at the home of George Arnold, an old and often visited friend. The place was 20 miles short of the city of Fredericksburg, which the travelers had hoped to reach by the succeeding Sabbath. On Saturday, the bishop showed extreme feebleness and passed a restless night, but refused to permit the calling of a physician. Early the next day, he frankly expressed his belief that the end was at hand. Being asked by his companion if he had any word to leave for the conference or his colleague, his reply was that he had already written and spoken so fully that further word was unnecessary. Asking the hour of the day, and being told that it was the hour of 11, he requested that the family and his companion gather in his chamber for worship. Strangely and significantly enough, the scripture lesson for the evening of that last day in the Sunday service was the last chapter of the Revelation. This chapter, Bond read and expounded the closing lesson of the day, closing the days of the labors of that faithful, simple life. And, well, the book of Revelation wasn't the last thing in the New Testament to be written. It's actually less edited than the Gospels, and it was written before the Gospel of John, if you think about it. The Gospel of John turned from 19 to other chapters, but the Gospel of John was based on something 4 centuries before. But anyways, and the Pauline stuff was, I guess, put down before that. So, in some form. So it's not the first thing in what we call the New Testament. During the whole of the meeting, wrote Bond, his soul seemed much engaged. He appeared much elevated, and raised his hands frequently in token of triumph. Truly affecting was his direction given to Bond to read the mite subscription, and thus showing that he remembered the toiling missionaries even in his dying moments. Being told that only the family was present, he said no more. His voice had failed, asked if he had found the master precious, and he lifted his hands toward heaven, and then, without a groan or complaint, yielded up his spirit to God. The solemn scene was closed on the moment of 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the Sabbath, March 31st, 1816, as is learned from the letter of Bond to Bishop McKendry. He was buried with simple undertaking. And ceremony in the family burying ground of his host and friend George Arnold, and only a few rods from the door of the cottage in which he expired. A month later, when the General Conference met in Baltimore. Plans were completed to have his body exhumed and buried in a grave under the pulpit of Eutaw Street Church in Baltimore. Long people erected houses of worship on top of human remains, or put human remains in a place of worship. But in this age, we don't have the most central acts of worship are not done over graves. I mean, people die everywhere, but you know what I mean, hopefully. Anyways, in June of the year 1907, under the direction of Reverend Charles de Beulah, pastor of the church at Alexandria, Virginia, the Epworth Leaguers of the Washington District Methodist Episcopal Church South erected upon the site of the George Arnold House a marble marker to which it is hoped in the not distant future to add an equestrian statue of the pioneer bishop. So, they obviously don't believe in the no graven image thing. Dr. Beulah gives the following account of the pilgrimage and transaction. It was at Fredericksburg that our leaguers of the Washington District met June 25th, 1907. All that was needed to make a good conference was there. A goodly number, a cordial welcome, hospitality at its best, a carefully arranged program, every speaker present and prepared. There was also spirit in everything, not a dull moment from beginning to end, and strength and reserve for double the time. It was an Asburyan conference and pilgrimage. Early Thursday morning, June 27th, conveyances carried our league pilgrims to Spotsylvania Courthouse, 12 miles southwest of Fredericksburg. We journeyed on 4 miles to the southwest of Spotsylvania Courthouse to the site of the George Arnold House. The leaguers of the Washington District had secured the plot of ground on which the house stood, erected upon it a granite marker 5 feet in height, bearing this inscription: "On this spot stood the home of George Arnold, where Bishop Francis Asbury died March 31st, 1816, erected by the Epworth Leagues of the Washington District, Baltimore Conference, Methodist Episcopal Church, South, December 1906. In the shade of a large walnut tree, we held our service." Some people might have picked a particular tree for symbolic reference, but that may just been the fact that it was big and shady. We sang John Wesley's noble lyric, "How happy is the pilgrim's lot." I don't know how that goes, actually. Read the 21st chapter of Revelation, the scripture expounded by John Wesley Bond at Bishop Asbury's request the day he died, an address on the life and character of Francis Asbury, another on the gospel ministry, concluding with a consecration service in which a large number participated. On the 9th of May, the body arrived under escort of Philip Bruce, Nelson Reed, Freeborn Garretson, Lewis Myers, and George Pickering. Is Pickering that thing when you stab something, but not like in a lethal manner, like prick with a pen, or what was that? Oh, Pickering. Okay. Yeah, there's some word like that. I don't know. A guard of honor was detailed from the conference to watch the casket that night, during which time it rested in Light Street Church. The next day, a solemn procession of 20,000 people, led by Bishop McKendry and William Black, the representative of British Methodism, to the General Conference, followed the holy dust to its new resting place. Of kindred in blood there was none to mourn, but Henry Boham and John Wesley Bond, his sons, in long and dutiful ministries, stood by the coffin as chief mourners, while the thousands of hearts besides, in silence, reverenced with mingled sorrow and gladness the memory of the illustrious dead. Bishop McKendry delivered a brief discourse, full of pathos and embracing some of the leading facts of his history and traits of character, after which the casket was lowered into the vault. In June 1854, the remains of Asbury were again disinterred and buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery. This is how major diseases get resurrected from ages past. Baltimore, where are the graves of Robert Strawbridge and Jesse Lee, as also those of not a few others of Methodism's unforgotten dead. Speech cannot perfectly portray the lineaments of the righteous, nor make wholly real the thought, the miracles of their deeds and sacrifices. The martyrs and confessors are but little perceived, aside from nimbuses. And aureoles that encompass them. The spiritual, the world-changing forces that informed the souls of the mighty dead are elusive to our busy and too often enslaved thoughts. St. Paul is better known to the average Christian by his long travels, the scourgings which he received, and the imprisonments which he suffered, than by his doctrines are the silent mastery of his deathless soul. Perhaps it comes of human limitations, our necessary dependence upon the tangible as a means of reaching the unseen, the spiritual. Francis Asbury has been dead less than a century, but it is only the picture of the pioneer bishop tirelessly tracing the continent on horseback in sulky R. in Chais that popularly survives. The apostolic spirit that, moving from land to land, drew about it the destinies of a mighty people and shaped to an extent which the hands of none other were permitted to shape a civilization Christian at heart, because that heart was preached into it. That spirit is but faintly seen by modern American eyes. 270,000 miles he traveled during his episcopate. Preached 16,000 sermons, ordained 4,000 ministers, and sat as the president of 224 annual conferences. Prodigious accomplishment, and yet it is beyond even this circumstance of figures that we must seek the true Asbury. Did he give a sermon on average for every Bible verse or something? For every Bible chapter or something? How many? 270,000? Yeah, maybe that's the number of no, I don't know the number of Bible verses, but the circuit of his power and influence is to the ends of our history, and though it cannot be so confidently said of him as Southey said of Wesley, that millenniums hence the influence of his life and work will be felt and acknowledged. The days that shall witness to him are yet many in the centuries to be. And might as well share the old index. I guess there's not a separate listing of the Bible verses. But the first layer is like the stories, right? So the close of mythology. And then there's the rules and the skills and stuff. That's the body, but the consciousness behind it, that's the spirit. But you don't get the spirit. All these people, you get to, I'm following the spirit of the law. Am I intentionally violating the law? No. But the spirit's where it starts and where it ends.